Morning everyone. Today we will be presenting to you our presentation on young people with disability and COVID-19. I'm Madison Heady. I'm 18 years old and I've been a part of the YDAN team since last year.
And I'm Rebecca Harvey. I'm 24 and I've been part of YDAN for almost 2 years now. I also work in the disability sector as a support coordinator and I'm an occupational therapy student.
Before we begin today, we would like to do acknowledgement of country. The Youth Disability Advocacy Network would like to acknowledge that we operate on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, which was stolen and never ceded, and which always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We humbly pay our respects to them, their cultures, and to all elders past, present, and emerging. So, what will we be covering in this workshop today? In Introduction into YDAN, Brief Disability 101, COVID-19 experiences from the perspective of young people living with disabilities. What lessons can be learnt from COVID-19 and how this all applies to you as youth workers. We will also have a short time for questions and comments at the end. Introduction to YDAN. YDAN is a youth network, the Youth Disability Advocacy Network, and an advocacy group in Western Australia that aims to promote the rights and inclusion of people with disabilities aged 12 to 25. YDAN was formed to address the concerns that young people's voices and experiences were being overlooked and misrepresented. YDAN wants to enable greater opportunities for young people with disabilities to unite and meaningfully participate in advocacy. The network intends to be a leading voice in systemic advocacy for young people with disabilities.
So we do this as part of most of our workshops and just kind of do a quick run through of what is disability. Forgive me for the legalese in this slide. It's not the most fun, but we'll get through. So disability is a normal part of the human experience, with some form of disability affecting 20% of the population, so about 4 million people in Australia. The Disability Discrimination Act 1992 defines disability as meaning the total or partial loss of a person's bodily functions, mental functions, or part of the body, or the presence in the body of organisms causing or capable of causing disease or illness, or the malfunction, malformation, or disfigurement of a part of the person's body, or a disorder or malfunction that results in the person learning differently from a person without the disorder or malfunction, or a disorder, illness, or disease that affects a person's thought processes, perception of reality, emotions, or judgment, or that results in disturbed behavior. So the reason we kind of go through this very legal definition is to see that it covers such a broad range of conditions and experiences that would be present in so many of your practice. So the types of disabilities. Disability, it's categorized in 5 categories. Many people live with or experience multiple disabilities, can be from the same category, from different categories. It's a whole mixed bag. And you can acquire them through injury, illness, trauma, or disease, or you could be born with them. Physical disabilities are those that affect physical function. So they affect musculoskeletal, circulatory, respiratory, immune, and nervous systems. Sensory disabilities are impairments or sensitivity in the senses, such as hearing, taste, and vision. Neurological and cognitive disabilities are those that affect neurological and cognitive function, such as multiple sclerosis or traumatic brain injury. Intellectual disabilities are those that affect intellectual functioning, creating difficulties with thought processes, learning, communication, memory, judgment, and problem-solving abilities. Psychiatric disabilities are those that affect psychological function, including disorders such as anxiety, phobias, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and so on. So knowing that disability is a really broad term and it encompasses a really big range of presentations, it's important when you consider how, as a youth worker, you might deal with disability and making your services accessible. So why do we need to be inclusive? So we often talk about the social model of disability, which is a model that sees disability as the result of societal barriers. So be they physical, so your service might not have a ramp. Communicative is ensuring you're communicating, it's pretty self-explanatory, but ensuring you're communicating with the person with the disability in a way that they can understand and ingest what you're trying to say to them. Or attitudinal, which might be, the thought that a certain kind of disability isn't really a disability, which is a really common one that I see working in the disability space. So this contrasts with the medical model, which is a very old-fashioned view that disability needs to be fixed, or it needs to be cured or medicated or corrected. So it's important to know the difference between these two models of disability as how you as a youth worker or your service accommodates people. And it can influence how much the disability impacts on a person and how well they actually engage with your service.
So how has COVID affected people with disabilities? What were and are still the effects on young people with disabilities today? First, we will discuss some of the positive experience before then going on to discuss some of the positives. The inaccessibility of online. During COVID-19, many services were moved to online environments, but due to the varying nature of disability, online doesn't work for everyone. For example, for me, when technology doesn't work, such as a microphone, this eliminates voice-to-voice communication. And for me, my typing speed isn't great due to the limited range in my movements in my hands. And so when groups are communicating online via text or on a chat, being able to collaborate and have my input into these conversations can be very difficult. not everyone is used to or comfortable with online services, and for these people, the transition to online was difficult or near impossible. For some people with disabilities, it also can be difficult to learn new communication methods, which can result from fatigue and engaging in these ways. Also, online services often lack accessibility features such as subtitles on Zoom or accommodation for people who require Auslan interpreters, and can also be inaccessibility for people who are at risk of sensory overload due to things such as excessive exposure to screen lights or people talking over the top of each other during online meetings. And believe me, there is a lot. I've seen it myself. There are additional costs required to make technology accessible. For example, specialized mice or keyboards, programs to allow dictation, or even just acquiring of the technology required to access the online world can be an additional cost to some people. Supports and support networks. So during COVID-19, many people with disabilities lost access to services and support workers. They lost support workers mainly due to the risk of infections, which came from having many people throughout their home throughout the week. This meant that many had to increase their reliance on informal support such as family and friends. For example, for my studies, I had a scribe that was provided from my education campus. However, when we transitioned to online learning, I was able to source a scribe, and so I had to finish my studies online without a scribe. This resulted in many more challenges for me, such as me being time poor because I was spending countless more hours trying to type up all my notes, using specialized voice dictation applications that half the time didn't pick up my voice because of my speech impairment. I have to say stuff multiple times and I end up just yelling and screaming at it. No, I said this. So it's very, very difficult. And then my family comes down and goes, Maddie, who are you yelling at? And of course, relying on family members. This had many negative impacts on the relationships and the well-being of disabled people. Also, despite requirements for physical distancing to decrease infection risk, some people with disabilities were actually unable to physical distance due to the close contact required for personal care needs, alongside the difficulties in obtaining personal protective equipment. This left many young people with disabilities vulnerable.
Another negative was the financial issues and instability, which we would have broadly seen across the youth work sector in general anyway. But the Commonwealth Government increased support payments for some welfare recipients, but the disability pension was not included, and this left a lot of people with disabilities in a really vulnerable financial position. Service providers, such as NDIS providers, were able to up their prices as much as 10%, even though the disability support pension and NDIS funding didn't get raised to allow for these added expenses. And I work for an NDIS provider. We were actually at the time able to charge people up to 10 days in advance if they'd cancelled the service 10 days in advance, which is absolutely ridiculous and inaccessible because I don't know how I'm going to feel in 10 days. I don't think you guys do either. So that was a massive issue going on as well, especially with the uncertainty of staffing. And with the loss of formal supports, compensating this loss added increased financial pressure, requiring a lot of young people with disabilities to pay for services with money they just didn't have. For example, with a loss of paid support workers, many people with disabilities had to start paying for the delivery of groceries and supplies as they were no longer able to visit the shops. Another negative was visibility in the community. So at times, society disregarded people with disabilities, and this goes on pandemic or no pandemic, but during COVID-19, it was really evident. There's a lack of visible awareness of disability in the public or even within the government. For example, the voices of people with disabilities advocating for the need to increase the disability support pension were completely ignored and received very little engagement from politicians. Particularly in the early days of the pandemic, there was a lack of understanding around the values of measures being put in place to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and how these would benefit the whole population. So instead of people with disabilities, and those who were immunocompromised, they became a target for people who didn't believe in the strict restrictions, but instead believed it should be kind of a survival of the fittest type argument. And some people with disabilities felt they were blamed for the lockdown restrictions. And I know in other places around the world, the lack of facilities kind of did become a survival of the fittest type of thing. And I know that a lot of my friends, especially in the US and in Italy at the time, were really concerned that if they did need medical care, would they be able to access it? Because the perception was we couldn't contribute as much as an able-bodied person. So that was a really big ongoing concern. And being grouped in with age or disability services also ignored the unique difficulties only young people with disabilities face.
So another negative was young people's mental health. Changes in routine and the need to self-isolate greatly impacted the mental health of young people with disabilities, particularly leading to feeling of isolation and stress. For many, mental health issues are common, and these were exacerbated during COVID-19 because of the change in lifestyle and sometimes due to the lack of access to accessibility services. Importantly, isolation and the loss of formal support also left many people in domestic violence situations, which endangered their safety and well-being.
So it wasn't all negative. I mean, personally, I felt a lot of positives from the COVID pandemic, which sounds terrible for me to say, to be honest. But one of the big ones was increased awareness. So COVID-19 increased the public awareness of many aspects of disability and the aspects of lives of people with disability. Through watching the press conferences, I know this was a big one, and my friends in Melbourne, we still watch the press conferences with them in solidarity. Just because we don't want them to feel so alone. But we all watch the press conferences daily, and there was an Auslan interpreter, which for a lot of people, it was probably the first exposure they really had to that. I mean, if you're not kind of regularly watching politicians chat on the news, you might not be exposed to it. And it started a conversation about how important this means of communication is for the deaf community. And for those with compromised immune systems or who are housebound, it was more understood what it might be like for these people, and the perception changed of people who are housebound being lazy or incapable to now being treated with greater respect and understanding. And this was a huge one for me because I was housebound for a number of years, and kind of people understanding what it feels like to have that deprivation of, your normal day-to-day activities. It was nice that people finally understood how that really felt for me in those years, and it definitely brought me closer with some people who really had no idea how it truly felt at the time for me. There's a decreased awareness of requirements to physical or social distance, which is ongoing for a lot of immunocompromised people throughout their whole lives. And you've got a better awareness of why pre-COVID some people might have already been practicing it. And secondly, it's become acceptable for anyone to request some space between themselves and another person or decline attending an event in person due to personal safety reasons. And finally, there's much more awareness of hygiene and cleanliness practices. Having the public aware of how important it is to maintain disease-free environments gave relief to young people with compromised immune systems. And during COVID-19, many services were able to be accessed from home using telehealth or online meetings. And this one's also great for people with disabilities in regional areas because, trying personally, when I try and find somebody who knows specifically about my disability, looking for an OT, I'm looking for a psych, I'm looking for a doctor even, I cast my net out like an hour's drive. I live in Bassendean. I can't imagine how it is if you're living in regional Australia. And, it extended to things like lectures being delivered online, and doctor's appointments can be attended over the phone, which is a fantastic opportunity. I actually started my degree this year and I was told it couldn't be completed online, but my first semester, except for 4 weeks, was all online, which was nice and handy for me. But we're hoping that it kind of gives universities a bit of a signal that actually we can adapt these things when we need to, and you were able to overcome that during this pandemic. And social avenues as well, which in the past were usually limited to physical attendance, became streamed online, which allowed for attendance from home and great for reduction in fatigue, not needing supports to go out in the community. And finally, this is a huge, huge one for me. People were given allowances to work and study from home. Something many, many disabled people were told was impossible until a global pandemic forced us to work it out. So it's really great. I'm now allowed to work from home when I need to at my workplace, which is fantastic progress, and I'm pretty stoked about it. And another positive is the focus on well-being. We didn't have so many things to stress about because we were all collectively stressing about the pandemic. So everybody was really getting into their self-care, and stopped focusing so much on production and commodities and took a look at our individual health. And there was time to find new interests and develop new skills and plan for the future. Me and Maddie were talking about how we've both been baking bread. I really got it down because for about 6 weeks, me and my partner didn't leave the house. We didn't go to the shops. We had our groceries delivered.
Rebecca needs to send me that recipe because believe me, mine didn't turn out that great.
I got real fancy with it, started making roast garlic Turkish bread. I was like, who is this person? But yeah, it was a great time to be mindful of your feelings. And I think we all kind of developed a bit of emotional strength from this.
So what lessons did we learn as a result of COVID-19? I know I most definitely learned a lot. We will now take you through what worked, what didn't, and what we can retain.
So what did work? During COVID-19, working and studying from home was normalized. It wasn't seen as abnormal or something only given under special circumstances. Services were suddenly made accessible for clients who couldn't leave their house, where in the past, not being able to leave the house meant you didn't get access to services. For home or bedbound individuals, online services and events lessened their feelings of isolation and increased their engagement in the community. Community awareness campaigns around hygiene made it safer than usual for immunocompromised people. Even through this hygiene awareness, it is targeted to reduce the spread of COVID-19, but it also lessens the spread of other viruses and illnesses too. And COVID-19 also normalised and made masks more accessible to those who need them. It's particularly true now in Melbourne, where mask wearing is now compulsory. And they've come up with some really cool designs. My friends are really turning it out in Melbourne right now. During the pandemic, my partner bought one and it had Mr. Burns on the phone, just sitting in bed. It was very cool. I think he wore it like twice, which is a testament to how great WA is doing, I think. So what didn't work? During COVID-19, many services made the transition to only delivering services through online platforms. And given some people can't access online services, it's important to ensure that online services don't fully replace in person. I had this issue working with a lot of clients who didn't have the means to invest in a laptop or a tablet and then pay for Wi-Fi and all sorts of things. They didn't have a phone that had a video call function on it, and their services were really heavily reduced for quite a long period of time, and they're still kind of trying to work back into their recovery. The loss of in-person support services left a lot of people with disabilities in trouble. These services should have things and processes in place to ensure they can do everything to continue the work when faced with challenges or barriers to delivering that work. I know a lot of places did phone calls, which again, it's not a perfect solution because we miss a lot through body language, and I have to say I've done so many NDIS meetings over the phone and it's just always super awkward because nobody can see each other and we all talk over each other. There's commonly a lack of affirmative action to support disabled young people who lost access to necessary services, and not seeing many others advocating for services to continue, it was really disheartening to see. If you see something that isn't right, please say something. So what can we... Oh, sorry, your turn.
Sorry, is it your slide?
I think so. I have it circled.
Sorry, you go.
So what can we retain? Because there's so many different types of disabilities, no solution will work for everyone. You and your service need to remain accessible, flexible, and willing to shift your approach and method of service provision to suit every individual, regardless of if there's a pandemic going on or not. A positive for someone is likely a negative for someone else, and don't use this as an excuse to only cater to one accessibility need. You should work with disabled people and come up with creative solutions and be willing to think outside the box. Accessibility isn't a checklist, it's a conversation.
So how does this all apply to you as youth workers or to youth work organisations, and what can we learn from these lessons?
So what can we learn? Circumstances can change for individuals or groups with no notice, and services need to be able to respond to these shifting needs. You should collaborate with young people using your service. Young people and young people with disability are the experts on what works for them and what they need from a service. They're the experts, not people who talk on their behalf. But I have to say, universally, every youth work organisation I'm engaged with is already right on the ball with this one, and working with your clients, not against them. Shout out to all of you, fantastic at it. Be open to learning from and implementing feedback. Don't ask for feedback and then not be willing to implement it, and don't take it as a criticism. It's an opportunity to grow, make your services more accommodating and accessible. Don't be afraid to clarify feedback or ask for a follow once changes have been implemented. And reach out to people who would benefit from your service if they were able to access it, and ask what they need. You might find these people have an unmet need which your service might be able to fill. Perhaps you're able to assist them by referring them on to another more appropriate service. Or even it might just be, something as small as you weren't offering phone services. I have a friend who's kind of like teetering at the moment on pursuing an autism diagnosis and wants to engage with a youth mental health service, but he doesn't want to go do intake in person. So he's actually really benefited from COVID-19 because he was able to do that over the phone and sort of break down the barriers that he's had for years and years. Ensure your workplaces allow flexibility in service delivery, and permit that of your employees as well. You allow your workers to have flexible working environments which give them the option to work from home. It makes the workplace more inviting, accommodating, and accessible, and it makes it more appealing to young people with disabilities. Finally, offer your services in a variety of formats, both online and in person. Now that COVID's mostly contained within WA, you might be tempted to move everything back in person very quietly. I would love that, but I keep setting up in-person meetings with my clients when I know I should be offering online as well. But it leaves behind those who find the online format more accessible. Ensure that services and events are offered in both formats, and it enables as many people with disabilities to attend as possible. So before we finish up and have time for questions and comments, let's finish with our top 5 key take-home messages. Number 1, the impact of disability is often related to how willing society is to be accessible. By making your service accessible, you reduce the impact disability has on young people. There are many types of disabilities, each with different needs and requirements. You must be aware of this when ensuring your services are accessible. What works for one person might not work for another.
Number 3, COVID-19 had many negative impacts on young people with disabilities, but it also had some really great positives too. Although there was and still is a lot to learn from the negative impacts, what we can learn from is the positive impacts too. They are just as valuable as the negative ones. Number 4, be open to feedback. You can make yourself or your service more accessible to young people with disabilities if you actually talk to us and take that feedback actually on board. And our final take-home message for the day: accessibility isn't a checklist, it's a conversation. Talk to us, find out what our needs are. We are all unique, and work out what works best for us.
So thank you so much for listening to our presentation today with the 8 or so minutes we have left. We'd like to give you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have. It can be about anything you like. It's about the presentation, about YDAN, young people with disabilities, anything you can think of. And we also really appreciate any feedback or comments you have as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody? If not, that's all good too.
I have one. Okay, first of all, thank you guys so much for the presentation. That was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you for having us.
I'm really interested in if there are any particular kind of further resources that you might recommend that youth services who are looking to continue their learning and improve the accessibility of their service that youth workers can look into and check on.
Yeah, it might be great to chat with Beck Evans about it. We YDAN do a presentation, which I'm sure a few of you might have seen, where we talk about accessible events, which I think is really something that is great to look into, especially as we're rolling back into more in-person services and the way we're advertising them, especially. But as far as resources around online presentations, I can't think of any resources off the top of my head, but we can get back to you on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to circulate things after the meeting to all the attendees.
Great. Yeah.
Hello.
Cool. Hello.
I'm Susan. I'm from Headspace Joondalup, and thanks for the presentation. I learnt a lot from it, and I guess I just want to know, like, you spoke about making events, more inclusive, or at least accessible online, and I'm really interested in that. We did kind of, over COVID, we ran a weekly like online game group where we just played like a drawing Pictionary type game, and like the attendance of people kind of fluctuated. It's also kind of a maybe a awkward way to meet people online as well sometimes. But I wondered if you had any other suggestions of or like examples that you've seen of events and how they ran for young people.
Yeah.
That are fun.
I had a lot of clients. I mean, I mostly work in the disability space, so I work with a lot of people with ASD and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Had a lot of support workers cropping up during this time, and they were running Minecraft sessions that were wildly popular. They would, it's quite a big thing. Or another one, I had a client actually started running herself. She started running a Zoom meeting where everyone would play Animal Crossing together. And because it was such a big thing at the time, it was a great, common thing to chat about. Everyone kind of seemed to be into it around then. I'm trying to think of any other kind of accessible events that I saw working really well during COVID. Can you think of any, Maddie?
There was actually a music festival on a couple weeks ago that was available to not only in person but online, and the amount of I went as an online recipient, and you could actually see all the young people who attended online, and the amount of people that had a disability on there was mind-blowing. So to me, it is encouraging those to get more active into the community. It's a way that they can participate in the way that they're comfortable, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, I think so.
I guess if we kind of tie it back to one of the points we had about, young people and young people with disabilities being the experts in their own lives, ask for that feedback about maybe why they didn't participate again. I'm sure you're already doing this kind of thing, but the consumers of your service are definitely going to be the best help here. We can only offer our suggestions.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Were there any further questions from the group for Rebecca and Madison?
Another one, I guess. What was your preferred platform for corresponding? Like, was Zoom better than, say, like Discord? Or I know that there were so many different options to choose from and different pros and cons, but yeah, did you have a preference?
Personally, I really liked Zoom. I heard a lot of feedback about Discord being kind of an overwhelming platform if you've not used it before, because there's a lot of features going on. And I had a couple of clients who did prefer to use Discord to communicate with me, and I had no idea what was going on with it. I was very grateful that they were teaching me how to use Discord. But I think, yeah, universally, Zoom. I know that the NDIS was using Microsoft Teams a lot, which works quite similarly to Zoom, but I think it is a paid service. There's that to consider as well. Maddie, do you have any thoughts?
Online had both a negative input and a positive one. Of course, I've already explained about the typing, and sometimes with my lecturers, they wouldn't allow students to have their microphone on, and so we used the chat. And so yeah, I couldn't have my input, but a positive side is that I have more time to like do my assignments. But in saying that, I haven't really had many experiences except for those TAFE lectures. I think Zoom is really good because you can have that face-to-face interaction even though you're not actually in person.
That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Cool. Well, we're out of time, so we're going to hand back over. But thank you so much for having us and listening to us chat today, and thanks for your great questions.
Before you guys go, Rebecca, Madison, would you guys like to spruik some of the services that YDAN has on offer? Because I know that you guys have a lot of resources that youth services could potentially tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. The service I think that's the coolest that we offer is we offer an accessibility audit of your youth service. So we kind of cover everything like really broadly from, the physical accessibility, which is something that's, most people are fairly aware of. Sensory accessibility, how your staff interact with people with disabilities. We can, do a secret shopper type thing if you really wanted. We also offer workshops like this, and we can deliver and customize it to what your service requires and what your staff require. And we also have a fantastic Facebook group for, general systemic advocacy kind of concerns. And I think it's just legitimately called the Youth Disability Advocacy Network, the Facebook group. I can't remember off the top of my head. But if you've got any young people with disabilities who want to reach out and join in on what we do, they would be more than welcome. And if you need any support, feel free to message us on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys speaking today. And this presentation has been absolutely wonderful. So thank you on behalf of the entire group.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
And you're both most welcome to stay for the rest of the session if you'd like.
Wonderful. I have to pop off to work, but thank you very much.
I have to go too, but it was lovely popping on and seeing all your faces again.
Nice to see yours too, Madison. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Later.
Okay, with that, we're moving on to the second half of the Youth Workers Unite session, which is being led by James Harris and Zach Gibson. Are you guys good to take us away, James and Zach? Cool, go for it.
Take us away, Zach.
Apologies for not having my webcam on. I've got my 20 community services. What term are you guys? Term 8? Term 7, almost finished community services students here at Stotts College. So it's been very hard for us. And apologies again if my microphone picks up and starts warbling or whatever else. We're literally in the class right now. We've been watching. So Kyron, hello from me and from us. But also thank you so much to Madison and Rebecca for me personally, but I also know for some of our students, revealing a lot of ignorances in terms of the kind of, and we'll talk about that in our section, but talking a lot about kind of the positives, but also what were some of the negatives of the digitalization that was kind of forced upon everyone. So thank you again. That's very, very insightful. And I think, yeah, for me, very much revealing some of my ignorances that I had. So thank you very much. I represent at the moment, I'm representing Youth Work WA. So we operate in the space of professionalising youth work for us here in Western Australia, but also having that broader conversation around Australia with the other kind of peak bodies but also with the youth peak bodies such as YACWA and YACWA and all sorts. And we're very much in that space of wanting to recognise the value and the safety in creating a professionalisation within youth work as a career path, but also as an industry, and the ongoing effect that has in terms of the safety and wellbeing for the young people that we support. I also work at Stotts and right in the middle of class at the moment, but in terms of teaching and lecturing, so that's been kind of my latest endeavour is working alongside the future youth workers and the future community workers to ensure and unashamedly gatekeeping who is allowed access to clients and young people. I think that is something that is more important, more than ever before, as we're kind of engaging in this new frontier. And definitely in terms of kind of I guess this environment of Zoom is all too familiar because this is how our students have been operating for the past couple of months. Like Rebecca and Madison were saying, of their uni degrees or whatever else, kind of being forced into this different environment. So I'm representing not only Youth Work WA, but also representing my students in the way that we kind of conduct this conversation now. But I wanted to introduce and celebrate James as well. So I remember when COVID had just kind of hit and everyone was very scared and not sure what was going on. We attended a Youth Work Virtual Summit and someone made it look flawless and very easy and kind of set the bar really high in terms of what it looks like to actually conduct ourselves in a digital space. And that was James and his team. And very, very impressed and kind of actually shocked at how far ahead they were of everyone else. So I'm kind of today, not so much talking about my perspective, but I'm kind of like that meme with Will Smith when he's like this. And I'll be kind of celebrating and pointing to James and the quality work that he does. So thanks, James, for being here. Did you want to start talking? Because I am a lecturer, but I actually get really nervous talking, so you can talk now.
Hey, welcome everyone. Quickly before I get started on the session, I just wanted as well to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on. So I'm in WA as well, in the Kimberley, and I'm in a Gugaja remote community. The Gugaja people were displaced by the Canning Stock Route and are actually now on Jaru land. And so I'd like to acknowledge the Gugaja and Jaru elders, both past, the present elders that have welcomed us on here, and the emerging elders that I get the privilege to work with. And obviously with this being virtual, I'd like to extend that to the rest of everyone here in the countries that we're on, and those elders and any Aboriginal or Indigenous people that are on this call as well. So what I'm going to do is quickly go through almost just a bit of a crash course in digital youth work. We're going to look at around sort of some program design stuff, creating aims for digital youth work. And we're going to take a look at digital youth work during COVID, but actually kind of have a conversation around what does this mean for the future of youth work as well. So just give me a sec, I'll share my screen and we'll get into it.
That is one thing that I wanted to say, James, was just in terms of digital youth work and COVID-19 is kind of synonymous at the moment. And like Madison and Rebecca were saying, how we do need to remember to kind of split the ideas, but also it did give us that kind of showcase in terms of what it might actually look like. And I know from what I experienced and what my students and everyone was experiencing in terms of the items being bought. So we had toilet paper, and that's still a bit of a mystery, but the other ones are pretty, it's very clear in terms of, people buying consoles and headphones and those items that do give them access in the digital space. And we also, in terms of me as a lecturer, we definitely didn't feel ready for that kind of engagement. And again, one of those things that Rebecca and Madison were sharing about those education shifts, and actually not really considering, but kind of requiring to jump. And that sudden access for a lot of youth organisations as well. I know I've seen more youth, youth organisation TikToks and Instagrams than I've ever seen, and historically, no one's ever been given permission to do that. So that's something that I'm excited to hear from you about today. I think I might have interrupted you, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to kind of drive that home in terms of, I really like those welcome vids and those virtual tours and those TikToks and those Instagrams. And I think a lot of youth workers would agree with me. And yeah, how are we going to do that safely and still maintain those professional boundaries, which I think is the main concern of a lot of either CEOs or managers who are afraid to approve this stuff, but suddenly did give approval and are now operating in a space of suspense and wondering what the future holds. And I just wanted to ask, in terms of the way you've straddled Australia and New Zealand, is New Zealand experiencing something similar for us, to us? Or?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm a proud Kiwi, married to an Australian, living in Australia, and a lot of my previous experience has been youth work in New Zealand. The youth work sector there, they went into a really hard lockdown really fast, and so the lockdown was actually a lot sort of tighter than even what's happening in Victoria at the moment, and that went on for 6 weeks. And so youth work really sort of mobilized itself then, but life's really back to normal in many ways. The only restriction now is actually on the border in New Zealand. There are no other restrictions. So youth work itself is in a really interesting place in New Zealand now, because they're going, actually there's a lot of really awesome learnings from digital youth work that we're taking into the future, and some cool practices as well. So yeah, I'll get into this and we'll jump back to some of those questions at the end. So the way that the session was originally put together was about applying the lessons of a successful drop-in centre to the online world. And the main reason it's that is because with digital youth work, we're not recreating youth work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we're doing is taking what we've always done and applying it with a new vehicle. So that's what we're looking at today. So don't think, oh no, I have to reinvent what youth work is. You totally don't. You just have to look at what are you already doing, what's working, and how can you bring that into a virtual space. So what we'll cover in the session is we're going to look at why digital youth work. I'm going to share some lessons from running a successful drop-in centre and how that can be applied online. Because as I said, we're not reinventing things, we're just looking at new ways of doing it. Then we're going to look at creating some aims for digital youth work. And at the end, I'm going to give a framework that you can use to sort of create your digital youth work activities from. And we're going to end with some time for Q&A. I've got my stopwatch going so that I don't go over time, so that we have time for that at the end. First, a little bit about who I am. So I worked for an amazing organization called Zeal that I couldn't speak more highly of in New Zealand, which is a creative youth organization that does stuff all around New Zealand to do with creativity and youth development. And so I was there as a youth worker, where I trained as a youth worker and ended up managing the Wellington Youth Centre for a long time with my wife as well. Last year, I had the absolute privilege of going to live in Jordan with my wife. We both are passionate about the Arab world and the Arabic language, and had an amazing opportunity to be there with World Vision, where I was working on a youth participation project, bringing together Jordanian young people and Syrian young people to identify issues that they were both facing and then advocate for change together. And yeah, this is me with a group of us. We got the chance to travel to Brussels to speak to the European Parliament about the things they were facing, which was an amazing opportunity. And yeah, just such incredible young people. And when I look at that situation, they're some of the most hard done by young people in the world, but just seeing the resilience and power of them was incredible. And now my wife and I have embarked on a new journey as we have moved to Valgo, a remote community in the East Kimberley, where we're on a real journey for us as a family. My wife is Aboriginal, but because of the stolen generations, her granddad didn't grow up with the culture, and neither did her mother or her. So we're on a journey of what that looks like for us as a family, which is what has led us to the Kimberley. Anyway, that's a little bit about me. So in this first part, we're going to get into why digital youth work. So looking at particularly first in the lens of COVID. So every young person has risk factors in their life. So some of these risk factors may be that they're in a single parent home, that they have learning difficulties, they might have complex or simple trauma, their parents may be struggling to make rent, and then enter 2020, all of a sudden their town or city is in lockdown as well. Those are all risk factors that as youth workers, we can do what we can to try limit the risk factors in a young person's life, but really we're strengths-based practitioners, and what we are about is increasing protective factors in the lives of young people. So to sort of balance that scale out, this same young person may have been in a sports team. They may have, attended activities at the youth centre, had good connections with a youth worker, and some close peer-to-peer connections. And one of the reasons that COVID was actually, when it first, with the onset of COVID, why I was really, really concerned all of a sudden is because I knew so many young people that this was their situation, that they had a whole load of risk factors in their lives, but really they had a lot of protective factors as well that were pulling them through and building resilience in their life. But enter 2020 and a lot of those protective factors were pulled away overnight. And so that's where with Youth Work IO, which is all about professional development for youth workers, one of the things that we were like needs to happen straight away is capacity building for digital youth work, because young people need it. And I think a really cool thing in this time is that for WA, not necessarily for Victoria yet, but for WA, we're sort of moving into, and we're asking questions about what does life look like post COVID-19. Obviously, we're still social distancing and things like that, but what does this look like? And I think there were some really cool learnings that happened really quickly that can be taken forward. But yeah, this question that I also wanted to quickly address, and we might get into it more in the Q&A after, but what about the future? Is digital youth work just for now? And in some ways, and Zach talked to this, digital youth work has been lumped together with COVID-19, but I'd like to think that we're going, actually, for the future of youth work, we've been able to learn some things really quickly. And I wanted to share last year, I was a part of a tech summit in Amman in Jordan, where we brought together youth from Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and a few other countries from around the region. We had young people travel from Gaza and Palestine. It was really an amazing opportunity to bring young people together around technology and moving forward. And there's amazing things happening with digital youth work already in the Middle East. And an interesting thing is there's this quote, you know, desperation breeds innovation. And pre-COVID, the desperation was already there. So there was a lot of innovation that was already happening in that space. So there's some real leaders in the space, I think, in the Middle East. But something I wanted to say, that a speaker at that summit came out from Silicon Valley, and he was talking about Moore's Law. So in 1965, the CEO of IBM, I think his name was Robert Moore, he said that computer power will double every year moving forward. And he thought, you know, maybe for a limited time, you know, that's what we can expect. But actually since then, it's been dubbed Moore's Law. And every 18 months since 1965, computer power has doubled. And so that looks small at first, but it's huge jumps, and it's still happening. If you think back, the iPhone, actually the first iPhone, I think, was 2009. So we're talking about 11 years ago. So what this guy, he was talking about Moore's Law, and I want to say the exact same thing to you now. This is what he said: welcome to the slowest day of the rest of your life. And expect that technology is only going to increase from here, and its adoption. So in many ways, there were a lot of early adopters that came through during COVID, but expect that we're heading into a new normal in terms of use of technology as well. Anyway, that's sort of some thoughts on the why of digital youth work. So here are some lessons from a successful drop-in. This is me and my amazing team from Zia Wellington on the opening night of our brand new youth centre, which was pretty cool. The young people decided that we're talking about breaking the cycle of youth unemployment. And they're like, how about we paint a bike and smash it and you know, that's their art piece on breaking the cycle, which I thought was really cool. So this was the first real lesson that I wanted to share from running a successful drop-in centre, and that is that something that young people need and something young people crave is consistent, predictable routine. They live in a world where many adults in their life are inconsistent, and many things in their life are inconsistent. They live in a world that can be quite hard to predict, even down to when I walk into class, is my teacher going to yell at me or not? All of those things, so many things that can be unpredictable in the life of a young person. And often, particularly more disadvantaged young people, but often with that inconsistency and unpredictability, there's a lack of routine as well. So to run really successful youth programs, something that young people need and crave is consistent, predictable routine. I just want to share a real quick story about that. This is an amazing young guy who was living on his different friends' couches. So he was homeless. He did sleep rough sometimes, but mostly he was just sleeping at different houses all around, and he didn't have a parent that he could be with. And basically he'd fallen through the cracks of the systems in New Zealand. We said to him, if you show up every Wednesday for our barista course, we'll drop you home to wherever you're staying at that time. The barista course is always going to be at the exact same time. We're always going to have the exact same offer to you. There is consistent, predictable routine around this. And of a 15-week program, with 15 young people, he was the one person that showed up every week on time and completely smashed it. And I think a big part of that was for a young person where life was so volatile, we were able to offer consistent, predictable routine. So for digital youth work, a sort of question for you is like, what does consistent, predictable routine look like? you know, how will young people know that your doors are open? And, you know, what does this look like during lockdown, but what does this look like for digital youth work in general? How can young people know, with your online work, how can you build sort of some consistent, predictable routine with that? Does that make sense? Is that cool? Maybe give me a thumbs up or something. Cool. Another really important thing that I learned during this time running the youth centre was this idea, and this statement probably doesn't make sense at the moment, but that a gardener doesn't make plants. So what a gardener does is set the right environment for plants to grow. So when something is organic, it has an environment that has been cultivated. And with youth work, and particularly spaces where you're bringing young people together, the role of a youth worker really is to facilitate and set the right environment for community to grow. And that's where I think great peer-to-peer connections often happen within those environments. And sometimes those same relationships, if it was those same people at school where that environment hadn't been set, they might not have the same healthy peer-to-peer relationship. They might have a peer-to-peer relationship, but it might not be healthy in the same way as when a youth worker is able to set that right environment. I had some more slides on that, but I just want to keep moving so that we have time for Q&A. Just get to the right slide. And then the third and final lesson that I wanted to share with you is sort of summed up in this statement that, dude, we haven't seen you in a while. What's been happening? Afternoon hangs isn't the same without you. And really, this is Youth Work 101, that young people need people in their lives who they know care about them and who notice when they aren't there and follow up with genuine care. Sometimes when a young person hasn't shown up for your program, it can be a bid. You know, it's them saying, without using words or even without knowing necessarily that that's what they're trying to say. Sometimes it is a bid. It is them asking, you know, do you genuinely care? Do you notice that I haven't been here the last 3 weeks? And so for digital youth work, I encourage you to look out for the same thing. If you're running consistent, predictable online activities that young people are engaging with for a while, but now they're not, or maybe you have a group chat going with some young people and all of a sudden someone hasn't contributed for a few days when they were very active, whatever that happens to be, maybe that is in the same way that happens in person or at a youth centre or in your programs. Sometimes young people not engaging is a bid as well. So I encourage you to reach out to those young people and say, hey, you know, dude, I haven't seen you post in the chat for a while. Is everything okay? Like, what's happening for you at the moment? And check in. So that's just some general thoughts from sort of in-person youth work and taking that to the online world. And one part of that is I want you to sort of maybe take some things from there, but also I want you to take from this that we're not reinventing youth work. We're taking the things we already know and applying it to a new space. So with any youth work, I think it's really important to start with going, actually, what are we trying to achieve? So these were some aims that the Youth Work IO team put together for digital youth work during COVID times, but I think that there's some really good things to take from this as well moving forward. So one thing is to maintain fun and engaging regular activities for young people as a protective factor. And this is for youth during lockdown, but I think maybe these are for young people that can't always travel from their suburb to where your program is, so they're going to join online. Whatever those things are, it's about trying to maintain fun, engaging regular activities as a protective factor. Another one is around maintaining positive therapeutic connections with young people as a protective factor. And so this is about youth worker to young person relationships. How can you maintain those as a protective factor in a digital way? And the third and sort of last aim, I would say as well, is how can you provide positive, healthy spaces for peer-to-peer connection in online spaces? And so that's, as I was talking about, young people have those peer-to-peer connections, but in a really, in a great youth work program, it is the youth workers that are setting the environment for those relationships to flourish and to thrive. It is youth workers that are setting some of the boundaries around what it looks like to be healthy in those spaces. So what does it look like, having that as an aim in a digital space? So what we're going to get into now is creating a framework for digital youth work activities and how that could look like, what that could look like for you. I just need to share a new screen, so give me a second. While I do this, does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask any questions at this point? Feel free to jump in. Do you have any questions, Zach, at this stage, or anything you want to highlight?
I've got lots of questions. I might wait for you to do your thing, and then I'll bombard you, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
So, we had a question in the chat from Leslie Yates at the City of Albany, and Leslie's just asked, I attended your online youth summit back in lockdown, and our online engagement was amazing after using the tools I learned. Now we are back in the office, our hours have been reduced and don't have the capacity to do the same level of engagement. How can you maintain consistency online when juggling time?
Yeah, really, really great question, and glad that the summit was useful. I think it comes down to, in some ways, what you are setting out to do. And there's the potential that sometimes if you think that there is real value in what you had been offering online, and you think that that's something that needs to continue in some way, even if it's just in part, sometimes I do think you need that internal advocacy within your organization to say, hey, actually, as people on the front line with young people, this is what we're experiencing. So I encourage that internal advocacy, but also I think it's important. There are a few thoughts before I move on. The first thought is that all of a sudden with digital youth workers were a lot more available. And so you may have been talking with young people in what may have been, out of office hours, generally, because everyone was just at home anyway. So it's a lot easier to do, but now you're on the move and all those sorts of things. I encourage you that with digital youth work, you don't need to be open all the time. Young people should know that you're a person that they're engaging with, and as a person, you're going to be fully open and genuinely open to them. But also as a person with your own needs, you need to be closed because you're not a resource to be consumed. You're a person to be there to support and connect with. So I'd encourage you to maybe even just go with consistent, predictable routine. I'm going to do 2 hours of digital youth work activities, or I'm going to be available to answer questions, like chat on Instagram during these times. And so not feeling like you have to be, just because it's digital, that you have to always be on, or just because the notifications are coming through to your phone that you always have to be on. So maybe you are able to carve out a space, but it doesn't have to be huge. I hope that's helpful. Those are just my quick thoughts, and we'll have more time at the end if you want to keep, if you have a follow-up question. So this is, some of you may have already gone through this. If so, awesome. Was it whoever was at the summit? This was the similar session that I ran there. So we put together this digital youth work, sort of a practical, non-techie guide. A lot of things out there, I feel like you could get overwhelmed with the technology. So what this is about is going, okay, for those of us that are technologically challenged and not, how can we create really great programs around digital youth work? So this is available from our website for free. I encourage you, I think Mason or myself will chuck in the chat if it's not already there. So it goes through the same things here, getting clear on what you're trying to achieve. There are some ideas for digital youth work, this idea of maybe running an online drop-in center to share your screen and play Drawful, which is a game that I love, play it quite a bit with my family over Zoom. You know, to host an online photo challenge. The COVID time capsule, which was an idea that we quickly had, which is still up there, so young people can write a letter to themselves, to their future selves, and it will email them what they said in a year's time, which I think is pretty cool. That's a youth work activity that we used to do in person quite often, and you know, we'd keep the letters and then we'd post them or give them back to young people later, but just that in a digital sense. If you're looking for activities to do, we put up or if you have great activities that you'd like to add, we've put together a Google Sheet, which is sort of crowdsourced digital youth work activities. So these are from youth workers around the world putting in, this is what's been working for me, and chucking in some thoughts. So that's available from the guide as well. Sorry, here's the guide. But what I want to get into now is how to create your digital youth work activity plan in 3 simple steps. And I encourage you to do this post-COVID as well, and go, what are some of the things that we could do digitally that work in with our other activities? So this first thing is this matrix that we put together, that basically there are 2 axes. So one-on-one stuff or group things with young people, and then connection and engagement. So for the purpose of this, it's a bit of a blunt instrument, but basically connection being things that are relationship based, and sort of the interactions are sort of conversational, engagement, which is about a bit more about activity based stuff. So one-on-one connection would be maybe a messenger chat that you wanted to have with a young person, or on Instagram, or, you know, one-on-one engagement. If you're like me, or you have young people that are like me that like to play chess, maybe you want to do some one-on-one chess or words with friends. There are different things in there. But then you've got, you know, group connections, which are video calls, or group engagements, which are things like playing Drawful. And so what this matrix does is it helps you sort of map out what are the different sorts of activities that we can do that meet the different needs that young people have. So in here, I encourage you, if you have a printer, that you could print out the activity matrix worksheet, and spend some time to do this as a structured brainstorm. At this stage, think about the activity, not the tool. And if you can, I always encourage people to pull out their texters, get your colored pens, and let your creative brain go to work on this. Take some time to look at, you know, what does this look like for you? Then once you've done that, what we've done is put this into, for you to be able to input your matrix into the digital youth work planning guide. And so from here, you can scroll down. So this is, once you've got the guide from the website, you can click get a copy of the digital youth work planning guide. To do this, you will need to have a Gmail account, because it's powered through Google Sheets. So actually, sorry, I'm going to open it in a new tab so I can come back to the guide. So it's going to ask you if you want to make a copy. So then you're making a copy of the master, and here you have the Digital Youth Work Planning Guide. So basically, once you've done the step in here, where you've put your different things in here, you're able to jump across to this and go, okay, well, I'm going to do online chess, and this is where we start thinking about a tool. Just going to check on my time. Okay. Online chess, start thinking about a tool. So, we're going to do that with chess.com, and the frequency, you just click here, and I'm going to do that weekly. I'm going to do words with friends. I'm going to do that daily. It's heaps of fun. People love it. For group engagement, we're going to play Drawful, and we're going to do that on Jackbox TV and do it over Zoom. And I think we're going to, we'll do that weekly. And you can see how there are these different activities that you can do and put it in here. So what this does is help you to put some structure and start to actually think about your tools. What this does in the spreadsheet is it then takes anything you've put that you've said you'll do daily, it brings it in here. So what we've got from what I've already shown you is it's automatically pulled across. We're going to do words with friends. We're going to do it daily, and you're able to start putting in, actually Mason is going to play words with friends. He's responsible for doing that daily with young people. What an awesome job. I envy that one, Mason. And we're going to do chat messages daily. So you can see that these things are being pulled across where we've said daily. The same thing for weekly activities and monthly activities, which we hadn't put in any monthlies yet. So it's not showing anything. And we've shown the COVID time capsule as a one-off. So what I'm going to do, what you would do after that, so that is pulled across automatically, but then manually you would go through, and we're going to go into an example monthly planner. So we would go, okay, let's start with daily activities. We said we were going to do chat messages. So manually you'd go across and sort of put this into this calendar. And what you're able to do with this is, I'm going to zoom out, is really actually go from a structured brainstorm into actually a bit of a plan, so that you and your team can go, okay, cool, we know what we're trying to achieve, we know how we're going to go about it, what tool we're going to do it, and when we're going to do that as well. And I encourage you, the same way that you would have a plan for your other activities, to do this with digital youth work. And now that we're sort of moved into this sort of post-COVID era, and not quite, but we're getting towards it, hoping that there's not a second wave in WA, that is, that these things would be in amongst the other activities that you're doing. So potentially this could be a planner, not just for digital youth work, but for sort of youth work as a whole. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else to add to that. Does anyone have any questions directly on that planner before we jump into anything else? Any practical questions? Or I'm just going to pull up the chat because I don't have it open.
No questions in the chat just yet, James. I'm keeping an eye on it as well.
Sweet. What that was in many ways was a practical crash course in sort of almost the how of setting up a digital youth work platform or program for your organization. But I think there are lots of things that need to be ironed out when it comes to digital youth work. There are lots of curly questions that organizations have. And so what we're going to do is jump to Q&A. Zach has some questions that he has brought sort of from Youth Work WA. So I think we'll start there and then jump on from there. Also, if you're at your computer and you're engaging, I'd love it. I'm in gallery view now. I'd love it if you chucked your camera on so I can see all your beautiful faces and know who I'm talking with. If you're comfortable with that, that would be great. But awesome. I'll jump over to you, Zach.
Thanks, James. Watching it the second time now, just as important and relevant for me, especially, again, the idea of separating out digital youth work from COVID-19, because it did come as a kind of crisis support idea, and now it's very much about, can we have this stick around for, and I guess from the Youth Work WA perspective, we, and for myself today, kind of wanting to represent those youth workers and people working with young people that are just kind of like, with the digital youth space, like, I just don't know what it's all about, and really confused or kind of concerned or frustrated about the idea of digitalization. And definitely we've seen that in terms of digital transformation, not only across our industry, but telehealth in general and other human services. And I'm sure we've got people represented here from different services that may have been experimenting or like dipping the toe in, and now have had to fully immerse very quickly. And I guess from in terms of our perspective is there are going to be mistakes that are made very early, and it would be for people that are kind of endeavouring into this space, especially those that have suddenly been given a lot of license to. What do you anticipate some of those early mistakes to be that we can both celebrate and also learn from without needing to make them ourselves?
Very, very good question. I think there are a few different tacks to talk about, so I'll try briefly talk to both of them. One of those is around safety. And, you know, how as youth workers can we remain safe online, and particularly with large teams and things like that. I think it's really, really important with all youth work to remain safe. So one thing to talk about in terms of mistakes to be made is around safety. The other thing to talk about around mistakes to be made is actually around quality as well. So I'll talk to both of those. I might start with quality. So I think one mistake that can be made, and I've talked to it already, is trying to reinvent youth work itself. And so I think youth work is a relational practice. And so I think one thing that we can do when we go online is operate in a way that isn't necessarily relational. And I think the best ways to figure out how to do those relational connections online is actually probably look for and ask young people what they're already doing. Whether it's, you know, having a group chat on Messenger, but who knows, in 3 months, Messenger may not be the platform. I don't know if TikTok has group chats, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So I would say, as with any sort of youth work, I'd be asking young people, hey, what's the tool that we can be using for this? But keeping that relational. Another thing, I wouldn't say it's a mistake, but a learning. My preference would be for people to create personal, if you're going to have, say, like Facebook profiles that you engage with people, I would say to have personal work accounts if you can. So say I worked for the YMCA, that it would be, you know, James Harris YMCA or James YMCA, whatever it happens to be. And post some things that I actually genuinely care about and make that a personal, still a profile that is me, if that makes sense. So you're not talking to a profile that's like YMCA Belgo, but you're talking to James from the YMCA, because when you walk into, and I'm just chucking that out there as I've pulled any sort of organization out of my head. But with the thought that as a relational practice, young people want to connect with people, so trying to keep it as relational as possible. And again, I don't think that's a mistake, but I think maybe that's just a thought around how we can keep quality. Then on safety, I would say just it's important for there to be really clear policies and procedures. And I know we had to move really, really fast with COVID. So I would say it's all right if you're catching up, but then if you have your policies and procedures now, making sure you have a hard reset at a certain point, so that so that everyone's starting from the same place. So I think that one thing is if you have, a work account where you're talking to young people, that those conversations need to be able to be audited. Someone needs to, if you are having one-on-one chats with young people, it needs to be, I would say, in the policy that people can flick through and see what's happening there, because particularly in large teams, I think you want to be open and transparent. It's the same way that I don't ever drive a young person home by myself. I make sure that someone else is in the car with me. Those sorts of things. How do we bring those same practices of safety that we do in person to an online space? And maybe one of those things is, being open to those conversations, like being confidential within your team, so that there is, that sort of safety. So I would say that that's potentially a mistake, is that people go, oh, we have to do it, just go for it, and never actually create procedures around how can this be a safe practice.
Yeah, I know that's the case in terms of we've had our e-safety people and our cyber bullying and cyber security people for years saying we need to be present in the space, but we need to do it safely. And that consistent idea of going to where young people are, and we need to be guests in their spaces rather than expecting them to come to what we create for them. And that was another question I wanted to ask was, how can we avoid making another youth space? So in this new frontier of digital youth spaces, how can we avoid making another youth space that is not created by young people? That seems to be the consistent pattern of our industry, is that it's not created by young people, it's created by youth workers with very little research. Do you have any suggestions, or have you seen any success in creating or allowing young people to create these spaces? Because a lot of the times it's tied to grant justification and things like that as well.
Yeah. I have a few thoughts. There are a few different ways. What I sort of talked about in some ways were almost like, how can you recreate what's happening with a youth centre sort of in an online space? But while I was working for Zeal, we started a sub-brand called Live for Tomorrow, and Live for Tomorrow actually almost recreated detached youth work online. So we used to what we called street youth work in New Zealand, where we were out on the street connecting with young people who were disconnected and isolated. I would say some of the leaders in the space, and what they did was they worked with a company to create an AI that searched the internet for young people that were disclosing distress, and then they would reach out to them directly. It was all on Instagram. They reached out to them directly on there, and then they would have these amazing chats. So they call themselves a reverse helpline, where rather than young people coming to them, they're going, what spaces are these people already in and how do we go to them? The same way that detached youth workers do. So I think they, in some ways, I think they're doing an amazing job in terms of going, where are young people and let's seek them out and find them. But then on a programmatic, but the thing with that is that's not the same young people every time and things like that. So what I would be saying for a lot of youth work programming, because I don't think that's what everyone should be doing, but I think it's a really cool example, is starting with, and it's the sort of youth work 101 in some ways, just starting with asking young people where they are, where they think you should be, how they think you should engage. Because the reality is, and this is the thing with one of the problems with funding in general is that the needs may shift, but the funding stays the same in the same rigid way. Or you said, we're going to do this, and in that time, the needs have shifted. The problem with digital youth work and this is we're competing with Moore's law, that every 18 months computer power is doubling. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 18 months there's like TikTok, but it's virtual reality, or, you know, whatever it happens to be, something that I can't even imagine. And things are moving so quickly that those spaces are going to change. So I would say, like, stick to your purpose, not necessarily the tool, if that makes sense. And continually be asking young people where they are and going to those spaces, rather than rigidly sticking to, we said we were going to be on Facebook, so we're on Facebook. It's like, well, if young people in the last 3 months have moved from there, like, where'd they go? So yeah, those are just some thoughts.
Definitely some reassuring nods there as well, in regards to that. I think for everyone. For another question kind of on this that I wanted to ask, and we have some comments and some questions in the chat that I'd like to get to as well. But just in terms of some of the quickly produced research that's coming out of COVID that relates kind of specifically, but we're seeing, and it was YACWA kind of explained, or were able to comment on this quite effectively in terms of kind of not only the education and the technology shifts, but the loss of social interaction. For what I've researched on the internet, and just keeping my finger on the pulse during COVID, was that we're seeing increase in productivity for organizations. We're seeing increase in revenue for organizations. We're seeing increased turnaround times for organizations. But kind of alongside that, we're seeing a decrease in connection. We're seeing an increase in anxiety. We're seeing an increase in isolation. So and I wouldn't mind opening this up to everyone present as well. How can we guarantee that balance, and that this isn't an opportunity for organizations or companies to kind of take advantage of young people or take advantage of the services, because it is so sexy at the moment. And then we're in a space where it's all about relationship and rapport. So how can we guarantee we're not abusing this space? Yeah, I'll open that up to everyone, because I think that's more of an existential question, but yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to jump in before I do? Mason.
If that's all right, yeah. I think that's a great question, Zach, and I don't have an answer to it, but it really touches upon this idea that we're more productive than ever and creating more revenue than ever, but we're not seeing the benefits of that in terms of actually working less. The working hours remain the same, if not increase, as technology affords us the ability to do more with our time. And the greatest probably most effective argument against that trend that I've seen is not a foolproof one, but it's around individual culture, and creating that culture that respects personal time and supports through it.
Yeah, I think to add to that is there are two main reasons people use social media. So like entertainment and connection, but quite often, like my family recently during COVID, it's been amazing. Started doing a weekly Zoom call where we're all in the same space and we're chatting with each other. And to be honest, I feel like my family hasn't been this close since we all lived under the same roof when I was a teenager. Prior to that, we still have like a family Facebook group, and it was seen to be connection that I would post, hey, things are going well, this is what's going on for me, and people would like it. But that's not the same as actually being in the same room or being in Te Ao Māori, in the Māori world that I sort of grew up around. There's this idea of kanohi to kanohi, like face to face is actually, prior to COVID, was, you know, it's always been a big part of that culture. And there is real power in being face to face. And I think liking someone's post is not genuine connection. So I think as we look for connection, people are putting this status in a family group or whatever, but it's not necessarily that same genuine connection. So I would say in online spaces, how can you create as close to as possible, you know, those sort of more moments of genuine connection rather than the sort of general dominant social media culture around what connection is. That's one thought. The other thing I would just say around productivity is probably there are just lots of meetings that should have been emails that all of a sudden were just emails. Praise the Lord. But yeah, any other thoughts or questions?
I'll cease my rampage now, but we had one from Susan saying, what's the situation now with Facebook personal work accounts? Is it allowed? And I know that some people have suddenly allowed them, and then there's some people present today who have had them for quite a long time. And there is almost, we're beginning to see that flexibility in terms when historically it's been, and it's not just been like, can I friend you on Facebook or follow you on Instagram? It's been like, can I have your gamer ID and these things as well? And we're suddenly seeing, you know, Animal Crossing, we're seeing like Minecraft was another example that was used where that's kind of okay, but I'm assuming there are social media policies around that, and that a conversation is beginning, or maybe historically it's been one that's been completely blocked, but then now, you know, now that grants and purpose are involved, we are kind of jumping into that space. Do you have any thoughts on that? And I know some other people might have experience or might have access to that kind of personal work account as well at the moment.
Yeah, as I said, I think it's important to have an internal policy, and I think it's important for you to decide as a team, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we'll be accountable with that. I think having those personal work accounts where it's, you know, you are a person, but it's a work account, is a really good option. And then having, like I said, you know, I wouldn't be alone in a car with a young person. So what does that look like in an online space? And I think that's something for you to navigate as a team, but there's sort of figuring out what's sort of best practice. And really that is, it's emerging stuff. And especially, as you said, there are so many different platforms. You may be, you know, having youth workers that all of a sudden are playing Fortnite in their spare time with their personal Steam account, whatever, you know, it's that sort of stuff that I guess as we navigate this new world, I think the main thing is just that you all agree, okay, these are the things that we are doing. And if a new platform comes up, we need to talk about it and add it to the policy and discuss how we're going to be accountable with that. If we're gaming together, how can there be accountability? Yeah, I think it's I would say always kind of bringing it back to, yeah, I wouldn't be in a car alone with a young person. So, and that's our policy in person. So what's our policy online, and how do we keep this safe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess bringing it back in terms of the collaborative document that we have with YACWA, the Code of Ethics, just in terms of what does that look like realistically, and then being okay with like maybe not the dream of what you thought it was, but if it can fit in there and it can operate within that space, we can guarantee young people as the primary client, we can guarantee that professional boundary and that integrity of the work as well. I'm really excited. I think that's a space that we need to actually, be in, and I think we're 5 years late to that space as well. So I'm glad we have the permission now, but it would be about doing it the correct way, I think. That's kind of, with kind of 8 minutes left, I'd love for other people to have the opportunity to ask some questions as well. I'm loving all the kind of comments and feedback that we're getting in the chat as well. Did anyone have anything that they wanted to speak directly to James about, or myself? I haven't said much, but you can ask me things as well.
Interesting. Harvey with his hand up. Harvey, did you want to speak?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, hey James, thanks for tuning in, and thanks Zach as well. Good to see you guys. I guess I just wanted to chime in a little bit around particularly the Facebook social media profile. I am one of those people that does have a professional work profile, and that was specifically around building a platform that young people were using at that particular time to communicate with young people back and forth. So primarily it was really around the messenger side of things. It's been so long since being on it, I can't even remember how that used to work. It just seemed like the chat function was always there. But it was definitely done with the intention of it being treated like any of the other communication platforms, like email. It was certainly one of those things where we found that young people just weren't responding to emails, or using email as a way of connecting with the service, the product, or whatever the organisation wants to call it. But it's very much with the psychological sort of profile that you're looking at that, I'm looking at that social media professional Facebook profile as being, it is a work tool. So very much treating it like email. So very much like the policies for my local government organisation is that is accessible in some form or way or other to be checked through, looked through, verified. So it's certainly one of those things. I have discussions with young people saying that it's not as confidential as you may think, but it's not like I've got my supervisor, my team leader, my IT department breathing down every single word that is typed, but they certainly have the capacity to look at that and also be in video chats, etc. And it's a matter of continually outlining that almost in each conversation that we have, because some conversations in the chat or the video there may have been some time since we last chatted or we last engaged with each other, so it may be weeks or months. So just I continually come back to that sort of broken record conversation. Hey, look, just a reminder, this is what this profile is used for, and this is sort of the limitations, etc. And so that, knowing it's almost like sort of always seeking consent in a way and being transparent, again, aligning that with the code of ethics. It's easy to sort of forget about that. I've already sought consent and it's all good. And I think that's where we, particularly as youth work services, sometimes frowned upon and looked potentially as not being so professional, that we need to continually maintain that and have those conversations. And young people, I find young people get that and actually appreciate those ongoing conversations. And by being honest and open and transparent, I find that my relationships are better for that, in that find that young people will come back and re-engage or engage for the first time because I've had that kind of approach. And I don't think it should be unique just to me. I think it actually is a professional way of handling those communications. So again, referring it back to the email templates, you may have seen that some organisations have a little blurb down the bottom of their email that nobody reads, but if you read it, it does say that, if you've received this accidentally, please contact the author and delete it from your computer or something like that. So it's almost, again, that analogy that you use, trying to avoid that travelling in a vehicle by yourself with a young person, that's as a way of protecting yourself, but also as a way of protecting that young person as well. You look at it from that perspective as well. And I guess I talk about that psychological shift because people will often think that Facebook is, it's social, so it's, casual, and it is, and it can be, but I do have a personal Facebook profile as well that I tend not to use a lot of. I probably use more the story side of things than I do from the actual Facebook profile itself. But that's a different, it's still me, but it's a different person to my work profile, if that makes sense. And that's that delineation between that psychological shift of what the purpose of those profiles are for. And that would be my main thing. And it's also supported from my local government organisation that there is social media policy that underpins that guidance and talks about how we as officers of local government, how we interact and engage in those particular platforms, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media platform. So so that's all I wanted to sort of touch base on that. And I mentioned in the chat around local government generally struggling to maintain, to be in those spaces. It becomes around an issue almost around marketing, because with social media, although it does have that chat feature, generally speaking, you do have that struggle that social media is potentially looked upon as a marketing tool, and therefore would fall under the marketing team in our organisation. And I would think in most local governments, and that becomes a different philosophy about what marketing does. And therefore triggers off all these other risks, particularly related to local government. And hence why local government, generally speaking, is a bit slower in the uptake, because it has to do checks and balances and also work out what are the risks of using those particular platforms versus also a financial argument. So our marketing department have talked about decreasing the amount of social media individual pages that our organisation has, because then it can focus its advertising spend on the one page, for instance, and that gives more value for the organisation. But, that could be different in each local government, or it could be similar. Again, sometimes it's not like a WA local government association direction. Each local government can generally choose to which way they go, depending, as long as they stay within, local government regulations. But it's still new territory.
Awesome. Thanks, Harvey.
Thank you, Harvey.
I saw it. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you, Zach.
You're all good, man. I had, so I think, well, I had one more question, and then I had a separate question. Do we have time for 2 questions, Maxon?
You guys have as much time as you guys have yourselves to present.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So my next question, and I might direct this to Leslie from City of Albany as well. My next question was, does this mean that regional young people are now at the table? And I'd love to hear Leslie's perspective on that. And then also you, James, being remote and regional as well. I think that's a question that, definitely needs that conversation.
Thanks. Look, I think this whole experience has meant that young people are, regional young people and regional workers have had more opportunity to take part and be present, where in the past it was always too hard, which has been fantastic, and opened up a whole heap of options for us that we haven't had in the past. And I hope that we keep it. I really hope that we keep it. The other side of it, like just listening to you guys or talk about the boundaries, which I've always held quite, my own boundaries have held strong, but I know you always give the impression in some ways though of a level of intimacy or connection that may not be as intimate or connected as the person you have that relationship with or your client may think it is. You know, a mentor said to me once that, you know, you want a young person to feel like they do know you personally, but actually they don't even know your kid's name. So, you know, it's that balance. But as someone that worked now in local government, so the boundaries are different, but in my past as a outreach regional and rural worker, I often had young people in my car by myself and I did outreach to individual homes and never had an incident. But in saying that, I would never have put myself in a car or someone's home that I may have assessed as unsafe, and you do that assessment. But what I found is often that was safer for the individual client. So in a regional area where they get Johnny-come-latelys, as they call them, you know, you fly in, fly out, you're not actually part of their community, building that relationship, not having that one-on-one time and not taking yourself to outreach or not giving them a lift to their doctor's appointment and having that conversation in the car meant that you weren't really invested. And it was safer for the young person. So quite often it was much safer for that young person to be in their own home, even if it was in the front garden or on their veranda, in terms of their emotional and psychological well-being, than to come into an office space. So I just wanted to challenge that concept a little bit. I think that it depends on the circumstances and the way you work. And I've just taken that. We used to have the same conversation about texting. So back in the day, you know, when you're working with a complex client and no one could get them in the room, and you'd be in a case management meeting with psychologists and schools and no one could get them in the room, but we were texting them and we're getting responses and it was frowned upon. So looking at Moore's law, you know, I think that some of these perceived issues around safety, if we just go back to those central thoughts around assessing the conversations, assessing the person's situation, reminding them of your obligations, I think it's transferable. I think whether you're not in a room with someone, in an office space, having that one-on-one conversation to whether or not you're in the chat, if you're open and transparent with what's okay and what's not, what's reportable and what's not, it is still safe. I don't know. That's just my perspective.
Yeah. I want to jump in on two fronts. One is to say that I totally agree. And often those policies where I work now, I'm in a remote community, and the official policy is you shouldn't be in a car one-on-one with a young person. But there are times that what that young person needs is for someone to just pull up, pick them up and take them back to a space. And it's, you know, sometimes you have to, but I guess a part of that is just being transparent about that, hey, there wasn't another youth worker, I needed to go pick them up. And because of those limitations or whatever. So I think I think one of the key things is just openness and transparency.
I was the only youth worker for an entire region in that role. So there is no one else to put in the car. So I did Albany, Denmark, Katanning, Kojonup, Noangarup, Tambalup, Jerramungup, and there isn't another person to put in the car with you. There isn't resources existing in regional areas.
Yeah, and I think the key there is just transparency and accountability. You know that I think that's the key. Is you're never doing anything in secret as a youth worker. That you know that you're open, that's what's happening, and that I think that's the key. The other thing that I just wanted to quickly mention, and then we should probably wrap things up, is so I'm a youth worker in a remote community in the East Kimberley, and what this crisis has shown for me, I guess, is the deepening digital divide as well. So it was a really interesting time for me where all of a sudden I was in lockdown, so I wasn't doing face-to-face youth work. And I have the sort of, I guess, background of digital youth work experience, including, the Tech Summit and Live for Tomorrow, all these things. And so I was bringing all this work together around digital youth work. But for my own youth work during that time, the closest thing I had to it were young people that would come and throw rocks at my house. We live in a small, community. Everyone's in everyone's pocket. And some young people would come throw rocks at my house, and then I'd come out and we'd chat at the fence. And so the interesting thing for me during this time is I dove right into digital youth work and sort of capacity building in that space, but also knowing, and it's almost a conversation for another day, but that there's a deepening digital divide, particularly for Australia in remote communities, and that that needs a different approach as well. So I was sort of straddling two worlds of digital youth work and this kind of dichotomy of actually the closest thing I have to youth work at the moment is when people throw rocks at my house. So it's sort of, 2020 is an interesting time, to say the least.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing with us as well, Leslie. That's really good insight for us. There is a veil of ignorance sometimes when we consider WA youth work, and that often translates to Perth youth work. So I'm very happy for your opinions on that. That it is an interesting space in terms, and I've had conversations with a few people about this recently, very recently, in fact, that whole concept of in terms of accountability, and sometimes it is unavoidable, those sorts of situations. I often come back to the fact that when we set the expectations for what a youth worker is, and that's a large part of what Youth Work WA is trying to represent in terms of the expectations of the youth worker, but also the expectations of youth work from a young person. And it is very, it's touchy in terms of some of these specific examples, and the young person in the car is one of them. And I'm sure for you, Leslie, and I'm sure your practice is immaculate, that might not be the case for the person that comes after you. And having the corrosion, I don't know if that's the correct word, in terms of those boundaries. This is my fear in terms of the digital youth workspace, or maybe not so much my fear, but I think for a lot of people making the decisions, the idea that as we stand right now as youth workers, maybe we're immaculate in our practice, but if we set those expectations and there's a change in, who is kind of facilitating, they might not be as immaculate as us. And I know for the majority of us, we've worked with those people that have taken advantage of young people when they've had that opportunity. And I think it does open up those opportunities. I really appreciate your perspective on it, because we don't get the perspective of regional and remote youth workers as often as we should. So thank you very much for sharing. And it's definitely a conversation that needs to continue to be voiced regularly. So thanks for joining us, Leslie. And also thanks for joining us as well, James, representing, often, it stops about 50 kilometres outside of Perth. So really appreciate you all tuning in. I had one last thing that I just wanted to, and I should have said it at the very beginning, but are there any young people here at the moment that wanted to give their perspectives on digital youth work? I don't know if any of us are we all old now? Is that what's happening? No worries. I would love to hear, this is recorded, so in retrospect, would love to see more conversation and questions, especially young people asking their opinions as well would be great. Did you have any closing things that you wanted to say, James, as well?
Just that I'm excited, and coming back in some ways to that quote that desperation breeds innovation, and people really did in desperate times innovate really quickly. And there's that graph of, going from innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, like how trends happen. And I've never seen so many things adopted so quickly during, especially around technology. It was just like actually quite mind blowing. So my encouragement as we move into the future is that don't let that innovation just stay for that time. You know, go through and go, what did we learn? What worked well? What could we do differently next time? And then sort of take those things into the future. So that would be my thing, is don't let that innovation just be for that time.
Before we finally wrap up, just a little bit over time, and thank you guys so much for this presentation and workshop. It was absolutely fantastic, and I think everybody else agrees with me from what I've seen in the chat and the comments. Did you guys want to do a quick spruik for YouthWork WA or YouthWork IO before we leave, for anybody in the room who wants to engage further?
Yeah, just that you can go to the YouthWork IO website and get the practical guide to digital youth work, if that's something that you'll find useful. We also run online professional development for youth workers. So there's 3 videos, 3 10-minute to 15-minute videos that come out a month, and then group supervision with youth workers who are all around the world. So that's pretty cool. It's opening up again on October 1st for new people, but you can jump on the waiting list if you're interested, or if you have any questions, reach out to me. But yeah, that's all really.
And for us, you can find us at youthworkwa.org.au. We're very responsive on Facebook. We love to hear questions and concerns and frustrations, especially around youth work and young people. And we're very big on celebrating youth workers and young people. So watch the space for more opportunities to celebrate. Yeah, thanks so much, YACWA. This is awesome.
Okay, in closing the session then, thank you everybody for coming along and participating. Thank you to all the speakers from YouthWork IO, YouthWork WA, and the Youth Disability Advocacy Network for your time, expertise, your energy, and your passion. It's noted and felt. We are continuing to have more Youth Workers Unite sessions in the coming weeks, and we'll be posting and promoting those online on our website, on our fortnightly e-newsletter. So you can subscribe to that on our website at yacwa.org.au if you need to, and also through our social media on Facebook and Instagram. So please come along to the next one. We've got some exciting sessions coming up around supporting Aboriginal young people around their mental health and their concerns through COVID-19 and moving forward, as well as another session in collaboration with some young advocates from the Multicultural Youth Advocacy Network on how to be a better advocate and ally for young people who are experiencing racism, both explicit and discrete, and systemic and institutional. So some really exciting and really hard-hitting conversations coming up that hopefully will be fantastic for the sector. I've also popped my email in the chat, so anyone's welcome to reach out to me with questions, concerns, or feedback on these sessions, and we always want to keep improving. Otherwise, hopefully we'll see you all at the next session online, and have a great afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, man.